Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much to the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for supporting us, and it's wonderful to be here. And I'm afraid for many of you, your English will be a lot better than my German. So, what I want to talk about this evening is kind of the big picture that relates to the work I've been doing over these last many years. Do we have a magic conversion? Can we have the... Yeah, I can see them up there. We switch it across, that's it. That's it. Yeah, thank you. What has interested me when I first started as an academic is I met many colleagues, and every one of them told me what made a difference to student learning. And they were all different. And I went out into schools as a teacher educator, and every teacher said, just ignore that stuff you've learned at university. Watch me. I know how to do it. And they're all different. And as an academic, I read the various journals, and you can pick up almost any journal and read an article that says, and this is the answer. How come we have a profession where everything goes? How come, and let's be fair to teachers here, they do have evidence that what they do works. For some of them, they have 20 years of experience of evidence that it has worked. But they are so different. And certainly when I analyse what they talk about in their staff rooms and their professional development sessions, it's fascinating that they never talk about their teaching. They talk about curriculum. They talk about the kids. They talk about assessment. They talk about schools. And it didn't make sense to me. So that's why I started on this journey. Now, I needed a scale to answer my question. Because what I wanted to find out is what's up there as opposed to what's zero. The 0 point has no effect on achievement. Now, when I started this, I had more than achievement. I also wanted to look at some of the affective outcomes. There wasn't enough research at the time, so I gave up. And I make no apology that I talk about achievement. And I also say, as many of you know, it's not the only thing we worry about. I'm delighted that there's a team actually based here in Germany that's now starting to do the same kind of work that I did to achievement that I tried to do for the affective parts of schooling. And yes, they are important. But I'm going to concentrate on achievement. Now, the next thing I needed was a scale. And I'm going to do it by asking this question. And I raise this question because it's one of the ones that I don't like to talk about a lot. Because most people get what I say wrong. So I want to raise it tonight because it's a chance to get it right. There have been hundreds of studies that have looked at the effects of reducing class size. I have 2 or 3 million kids in my sample on class size alone, around 80 to 100,000 teachers that have looked at classes of teachers in typically 25 to 30 compared to classes of 15 to 20. And where do you think along that continuum the average effect of class size would be? Like, hands up if you think it's up that end. Yeah. Now, I bet if there was an election tomorrow here in Germany, class size would be the dominant discussion. And because hardly any of you put your hand up there, why is it that we're so obsessed about it? How many think it's closer to the 0 point? I'm checking to see who's read the book. The effect size is 0.2 on my chart. Now, let's get it right. A 0.2 means that reducing class sizes enhances achievement. I've never said that reducing class size has a negative effect on achievement. It does not. It doesn't even have a 0 effect. It has a 0.2 effect, and you can see it's kind of like a 0.5 year increase. If the effect size was 1, which it's not, you can see the effect. And what I'm trying to do here, and this is to introduce you a kind of relative to the 0 point. Now, what happens now is many people look at that class size effect and they say, Well, compared to not having it, larger classes, which is the 0 point, it's a good thing. And what many teachers would say in another context is, look, if my effect size is 0.2 compared to not having me, I am worth it. And this is the major problem in the field of education. We compare something we want with something we don't have. We compare us with not having us. We compare a new innovation with not having that innovation. We compare a new curriculum with not having that curriculum. And it's the thing that's killing us as a profession, because the 0 point is the wrong point. It's the wrong point of comparison. So what I did is said, well, what is the right point of comparison? Well, 20 years later, I've now passed 1,000 meta-analyses. I have close to 250 million students that I have collected over the years. And the primary question I want to ask is, what's the average typical effect? Well, on my chart it's 0.4. So you can start to imagine now that compared to all the things we do, from the home, from the family, from the school, from the principals, from the resources, from the curriculum, from the teaching strategies, when I put them all into the thing and churn it all around, I get 0.4. Now look at the 0 point. There's hardly anything that we do that harms children. 95% of things that we do to kids, if not more, we can enhance their achievement. All you need to enhance a student's achievement is a pulse. When the parents say, I can do better than a teacher, if they have the 0 point in mind, they are correct. And what worries me as teachers is we say, compared to not having me, the 0 point. What interests me is, what is the common story underlining the green zone compared to the yellow zone? And hey, if you had a child, would you like that your child to be in a teacher who systematically gets above average effects or below average effects? It's easy, isn't it? Now, some of my critics say, but you've set it at the average. Well, great. You want to set it high? Good luck to you. I'm giving a TED talk tomorrow in Sweden, and the title is, Why is there so many successful teachers out there? And when I look at Germany and I look at where you fall on PISA, you're in the top 20 odd. There's 150 countries behind you. My estimate would be that here in Germany, 50 to 60% of teachers in our schools are up in that green zone. Incredible amount of success out there. And certainly, I'm sure Deborah will talk about this later, our work is now trying to get schools to understand, firstly, where they fall on this chart. And if they're in the green zone, I want them to stop and smell the roses and understand why they're so successful and do more of what they've been doing. But if they're in the yellow zone, I want them to stop and think how they're going to change. Not do more of what they're doing, how they're going to change. The good news is that this chart is pretty unrelated to socioeconomic status. We can't blame the kids. So that's what I've been trying to do, is to understand what that story is. And yes, in my book I created a league table and a barometers. But tonight I want to spend a wee bit more time of saying, what's the big story? Let me start with what it is not. These things don't matter. They have very low effects. And I'm going to suggest to you, I'm going to guess, because I don't know German, so I can't read your newspapers, that your majority of your debates in this country are about these issues, the things that don't matter. The majority of debates in classrooms and schools are about these things. We have a massive politics of distraction, where we distract the debate from what I'm going to show you truly does matter. For example, we love to talk about the structure of our schools, how we group our schools, how we have charter schools, how we have class size, how we can group our children into ability grouping, and all these kinds of issues, and none of them, not one of them, of the structure issues, is greater than 0.4. Now, I'm not saying these things are absolutely unimportant. They're the basis of where we're going to go to next. But overly obsessing about these things truly is a distraction. It's not many attributes of the students. So often we hear, if only you had given me the right students, I could have been successful. And we have this whole debate about if students don't learn, we have to understand why it is they don't learn. And I'm going to suggest that that's not the right question. And a lot of the kind of attributes, like in Australia at the moment, our biggest manufactured crisis is that boys are not learning very well compared to girls. Well, the effect size is trivial. How come we can have a debate about that when it really isn't the most important issue at all? Like, you all know that the difference between boys is enormous. The difference amongst girls is enormous. The average effect is trivial. But we allow that to become a massive debate. We turn our attention to it. We run professional development sessions. We make claims that boys' brains are wired differently from girls. Well, sorry. It's just not that critical. There are much more important things. I do want to mention the one at the bottom because it sticks out and it concerns me deeply how we're starting to pre-label our children. Now, I'm not saying for a minute that ADHD, autism, Asperger's aren't real. They are. I don't believe the frequency of it. What that minus 0.61 says is if you take two students of the same kind of personality, attitudinal attributes, and you label one, ADHD, Asperger's and so on, you get a minus 0.61 effect, negative on achievement. Same kids, just differently labelled. Now, my personal view from the work I've been doing is that so often in education, parents and teachers, when they label a child, they have an explanation why the child can't. And that's not what the medicos ever imagined that we would do, because they use diagnosis as the first step to intervention. And so that's my explanation about why it's happening. We can fix it, but it deeply worries me that we want to pre-label our children. Our parents particularly want to label our children. It's not who the teachers are. And if you look down that list, there's a few worrying things there. Like the most bankrupt institution I know is the one I work in, teacher education. Now, here's an important thing about the work which sometimes people miss when they read my book. That doesn't mean that we should ignore teacher education. That means we need to get it right. And we've got a wonderful opportunity for doing it dramatically different to what we do now, because as we're doing it, we're just reproducing what's out there. The other one that worries me is teacher subject matter knowledge. I can't find anywhere where teacher subject matter knowledge matters. And when Mary Kennedy does the qualitative metasynthesis, she can't find it. Now, that does not mean that we should ignore it. In fact, for the last 5 years, I've been very invested to try and understand why it doesn't matter, so we can make it matter. And I was very excited earlier, I think it was this year, when I read Jürgen Berman's work, where he actually found effective subject matter knowledge. I'm absolutely convinced it should matter. And I think understanding why it doesn't matter is a very important point to start, and I'd be happy to talk about that at some point because it deeply interests me. Teachers love to talk about the programs they run. We love to talk about, I'm going to do direct instruction or reciprocal teaching or all these kinds of methods. And these ones particularly are very common. And I call them kind of the programs that aim at deep thinking. You can see the effects. Now, the major reason they don't work is because to be able to think deeply, you need surface information. And it's about getting that proportion right of surface and deep. It's not just going deep all the time. And folks, I'm sorry, technology has not made much difference. And I have so many times I meet with groups and politicians and business people, and they just think, if only it was more laptops, one laptop. You have that too? Now, here's what's interesting about the technology. There is 134 meta-analyses that have looked at the effects of technology. Now, this is a pretty crude distinction, but I'm suggesting it as a way forward. When teachers use technology to do what they've always done, when they use Google instead of encyclopedia, when they use word processing instead of getting the kids to write it with a pencil and paper, the knowledge consumption notions, the effect is very small. But if they started using technology more about how you produce knowledge, maybe we're going to have a higher effect. But so far, it's very hard to see that. Now, one of the arguments people say to me, oh, but all your research was done 10 years ago. It's old technology. For the last 50 years, the average effect size of technology has barely changed. I'm sorry, we're not waiting for new technology. I know the revolution is coming. It's been coming for 35 years. And we have not yet, as teachers, worked out ways of how we can teach differently using the technology. Because so often we teach the same, but just use the technology. So my message is that technology, not that it can't work, but it hasn't worked. And it could still work. So that's the bad news. And I certainly find, and I suggest to you, that a lot of the things I've talked about dominate the debates. My argument is this. How do we make teachers see learning through the eyes of their students? Not through what they think they do. Not having a debate about which teaching method is better, but which teaching method has the better impact. And teachers, if your teaching method is not having an impact on a student, it's not the student that needs to change. It's you. And you have to change your teaching methods. So having a variety of teaching methods is much more successful than having one, even if you're particularly good at one. Some of our kids don't fit nicely with how we like to think about the world. Our job is to be the one that changes. And it's also how we can get students to see themselves as their own teachers. We love to talk in jargon, and we have lovely jargon for that. We call it self-regulation, metacognition, 21st century skills, lifelong learning. To me, it's simple. It's when students become their own teachers. That's what all those things mean. And we've certainly done a lot of work over the last 10 years, and when I was working in New Zealand, on both trying to come up with better ways to show teachers what their impact is, how we can get teacher observation in classrooms, not of the teacher, but of the impact they're having. And that's the kind of work that Deborah and her team have been doing with, I would like to believe, a lot of success. So let's go to the good news. Let's go to the other side. And the second book I wrote, I wanted to call it Know Thy Impact. The publishers weren't very happy. They wanted the word visible learning in the title. But Know Thy Impact. When teachers walk into a classroom, when school leaders walk into a room, and into a school, and they say, my fundamental job is to understand my impact, all the good things follow. Now, it begs the question, the moral purpose question. Impact about what? And so it should. Impact about over how many kids? Am I just impacting these ones or the whole lot? And as critically, what's the magnitude? How big is my impact? Am I getting that 0.4 effect size? And you can see the kind of notions of providing formative evaluation back to the teacher, from looking at how we respond to intervention, which is coming out of the special education literature, which I think can apply to everybody. And I like the classroom discussion one up there because we're doing a lot of research in our team on classroom discussion because it's very, very hard to get classroom discussion going in a classroom, particularly when a lot of students talk to each other and it's incorrect. It's much more efficient for me, the teacher, to tell you. And so we're trying to find ways to get more classroom discussion going. Now, I'm in Germany today, but in the US last year when they Bill Gates did a massive study and 3,000 classrooms, and he followed them through for 3 months, and he put a webcam in every one of them. 65% of classrooms in America in 3 months do not have a single classroom discussion. Now, what is it in your classrooms? They're not easy to organise. And by classroom discussion, I mean, I'll find this very hard to do. I have to be quiet. I have to shut up. And so setting them up. And my argument is that through classroom discussion, you hear the impact of your teaching. One of my worries in the world at the moment is that we're starting, and I get blamed for this, to focus on the teacher. And as you said in your introduction, I have put a lot of focus on the teacher. And I worry that I've caused a bit of damage here. And so I'm trying to move away and talk about teachers' collective impact, how teachers can work together to talk about their impact. Because I might think in my classroom I'm having a lot of impact, but if I don't share that and test it and get some critique of it, then I could be quite successfully wrong and never know it. And this, I think, is a very important role for school leaders, is to create a discussion in the staff room about their impact. And it's not easy to do. You have to have a tremendous amount of trust in that staff room before teachers will talk to each other about their impact. Now, all of you who are teachers in this room, you know that you're not successful with every kid every day. That's the norm. How can you go to a staff room and say, I'm having difficulty with this child teaching this? Have you got ideas? We don't do that. We talk in much more generalities. And how can we get that kind of teacher collective efficacy going into classrooms? It's a sin to go into a classroom and watch another teacher teach. But you must go into a classroom and watch how students learn. Watch the impact of teaching. And this is where we do a lot of work in micro-teaching. We actually video the students and we ask the teachers for their reaction. We don't video the teacher. And I suggest that you try that and notice how so many children by age 8 have learnt how to be passive in our classrooms whilst we talk. I think it's interesting that teaching is one of the few occupations where children come to school to watch the teacher work. If I had to say one thing about learning, and that is, if you know the student's prior learning, you're more likely to be successful. And one of my struggles is someone 200 years ago invented the notion that all 8-year-olds should be in year 3 and all 10-year-olds should be in year 10, and that's how we should teach them. And we know that that's just nonsense. They vary dramatically. And so knowing what their prior achievement is and then allowing for different pathways to get to success. I'm actually going to suggest that we don't change the success criteria much for all our students. That's a very strong statement, probably too strong. But differentiation means that there are different ways to get there. And what I despair is many teachers who give children different work to do, which they can probably do anyway. It's too easy for them and there's no challenge in it. And so this notion of knowing their prior learning, like take the first one up there. What that says is, I've been talking to you now for about half an hour. And what you don't know is under your seats, don't look yet, there is a test of what I've said. Are you ready for your test? Now, before you do the test, I'm going to ask you to predict your score. What that says is that's what students are the very best at. They are very good. By age 8, they can predict what score they're going to get. If you don't believe me, try it before your next test. And you've got to seriously wonder, therefore, why we test kids. I argue that we test kids so that we can give feedback to the teacher about their impact. Because there's not much point telling the kids. Sometimes it gives them confirmation. Sometimes they love it when you make a mistake and give them a higher score than they expected. But the feedback to the teacher is dramatic. But the point is, our job is to kind of mess that up for the kids. Our job is to understand where each student is and what they think their performance is and raise the ante, make it more challenging, and not keep giving back to them what they already can do. So how do we get more challenge? And certainly teenagers love challenge. They thrive on challenge. Sometimes it's not very socially desirable challenge. But they love, how do we get more challenge back into it? And most of us will keep being involved in the task if there is challenge there. I don't know how many of you are obsessed about Angry Birds, computer games. It's kind of not a bad analogy. They know exactly your prior performance, your last score. They know the Goldilocks principle of challenge. You know, Miss Goldilocks, not too high, not too low. And they also know then that they can pour in the feedback so that you can get to that next level. And then what do computer games do? They raise the challenge. And you are prepared to reinvest in the learning, on and on, some of us for hours and hours and hours, because we want to get to that challenge. It's no different in classrooms. And knowing that prior learning is a pretty critical step. Obviously, the second part is the challenge. Now, one of the things that I certainly find in the visible learning work is the more you expose to students near the start of the lessons what it looks like to be successful, the more the students are successful. Whereas so often in our schools we say, wait, in 6 weeks' time we'll give you a test and then you'll know what it means to be successful or not. Now, some of our kids are quite happy to play that game. But the ones that I want to get more involved in this business of education is showing them what success looks like up front. Now, I was a music teacher. It was relatively easy in music to show students up front what success looked like by playing a piece of music or getting someone else to do it, etc. But it's no different in math and reading and those notions. Show them what success looks like so that they know what it is when they get there. Because certainly, again, by the ages of 10, 11, 12, some of our students don't want to play our game because they know that when they get there, they're going to get more. They want to have success, and they want to have a notion of understanding what it looks like at the beginning. They want some clarity about that. Feedback. There's no question that feedback is one of the more powerful influences on learning. But it's also the most variable. There's lots of bad feedback, lots of good feedback. And I've spent a lot of my academic research trying to understand this notion of feedback. And certainly when we ask teachers, what do they understand by feedback and what do they do? What they do is they talk about, is the kid got to the point of success? What has he or she done? What can I correct? What kind of critique can I put on it? But when we ask students, what do they mean by feedback? They don't say that at all. For students, they say, feedback tells me where I go next. And what we do in our work is we ask teachers to provide feedback, write it out, spend all Sunday afternoon writing it, and then we give it to the students and we say, now, interview the students a day later and ask, what do they remember? It's a bit scary if you do this because often students get it wrong, they don't understand the feedback, they misinterpret the priorities. But what they do remember is anything that tells them where to go next. And if it's not there, they say it's pretty useless. And university students are the best at saying that. Now, of course, where to next depends on good information about what they're doing now and where they've been. But the absence of the where to next is quite scary in a lot of teacher work. So we're doing a lot of work, and Deb and her team is helping teachers to say, yes, you should provide all that critique and criticism and commentary and the marks and all the other things you want to do. But if there's no where to next, the students think that the learning is over and they don't learn anything. And certainly the teacher-student relationships is very, very powerful. And the reason it's powerful is if you have high trust in your classroom, the students will see errors and mistakes as opportunities. Too often they see errors and mistakes as failures. The reason we go to school is to learn what we don't know. How do we make not knowing? How do we get, if you're in the pit and you don't know how to get out of it, how can we make that a good thing? Because learning is tough. Learning is dependent on not knowing. And so that's why that trust is so critical. Let me come back to the programs. I said before that the deep programs by themselves had low effect sizes. The art in this business is knowing when to move from surface to deep. You've got to have surface first. You can't think about nothing. When you're learning something for the first time, brand new to you, you need more surface than deep. As you get more familiar with the content, the facts, the ideas, then you need to move to deep. In our science of learning work at the moment, we're looking at how teachers do this, and what's interesting is that some teachers are excellent at giving kids lots and lots of knowledge. And some teachers are excellent at giving kids lots of ways of thinking about deep notions. Where the struggle is when is the right time to switch from surface to deep? How do you switch from getting more ideas to relating them? And that, I would argue, is a deliberate teaching strategy. And the skill is knowing when to do it. And so we spend a lot of time in our work looking at where the student is in terms of the deep surface to deep and these kinds of programs. Let me give you one example. If you remember the earlier chart, problem-based learning, which is very common in first-year medical studies. We don't have to do another study to know that it's an abject failure. But when you do it at fourth-year medical school, it's an enormous success. Why? Because then they have something they know about that they can problem solve. And so one of my worries in this world at the moment is we're trying to privilege some of our more deep inquiry methods is we're missing the point, that we need both. And hence these programs which are built on both and working through both the ideas and then relating them. And challenge. I've mentioned this. Kids love challenge. We love challenge. Learning is hard work. And it's how we can get more challenging. And I find, for instance, that first one is fascinating. That outward bound programs, adventure programs, they don't even teach from reading and mathematics. But they have that kind of impact on it. And it's really interesting to think why. We're teaching the students that sometimes how they're thinking now is not good enough. They might have to give it up and try something new. How you can work collaboratively. You cannot get down a river rapid or climb a mountain or go down an abseil by yourself. It's a collaborative effort. And how you're going to have to do those things. And acceleration fascinates me. Getting kids to skip a class or to go up a class. 0.88. I worry that so much of our curriculum is full of stuff. And I'm looking forward to the first country to come up with a curriculum that hardly has anything in it in terms of content. Think back when you were 10. What did you learn in social studies and civics or in science? Kind of who cares? But what I hope you learned was the thrill of understanding the science and the social studies. So why do we get over-obsessed with the content in our curriculum? And maybe we need to have acceleration for all our students and to be less obsessed about some of the ideas and get from enough ideas so we can go to deep. So folks, what I'm trying to argue here this evening is that there's a massive amount of distraction in our business. And let's not blame the politicians and the media. We as educators do it too. We love to talk about the things that don't matter, the structures. But hey, expertise is out there and makes a difference. And we should be delighted that there is so much expertise that's around us. Now, yes, it's harder to see. So if I invest money in it, it's harder to see. If I invest money in smaller classes, I can see them. I can see brand new buildings. I can see brand new curricula. I can see test scores. And yes, many of these things are harder to see. Except, no, it's not. We know that teachers vary. Students know that teachers vary. Students are very, very adept at knowing if they're going to learn something in this next class, if this teacher's going to make a difference. And certainly all our work is trying to worry about these kind of notions. How we can get more expertise in our system. How we can get teachers to understand their impact. There was a study done out of Harvard a couple of years ago by Therese Amabile. And she looked at many different industries and workplaces, not teaching. And she asked the question, why is it? What makes workers get pleasure out of their work? And what she discovered is that when they get evidence of their impact, when a barista, a coffee maker knows and gets feedback that they've made a really good cup of coffee, they get a sense of pride about that. And it's no different amongst our teachers. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have bad teachers. You saw the graph. There's hardly anyone less than 0.0. But there are teachers who systematically get less than 0.4. And I would like to know in a school what that collective impact is of that school and how we can get the teachers to work together to have these as their mind frames, their way of thinking about their job. We have a very simple acronym in English called Teachers Are to Die For. They have to be very good at diagnosis. They have to be very good at having multiple interventions. And they must be very good at evaluating their impact. And that's the kind of work that we're doing in our schools to try and privilege these things. I often wonder why visible learning kind of caught on. In academia, you come up with an idea and it has 1 year and it disappears. Well, I think I'm up to about year 6. And one of the reasons, immodestly, is sometimes all I'm doing is giving some teachers permission to keep doing what they've been doing. And those are the teachers that have got the most excitement out of this work. Because certainly it is the case that we have a tremendous amount of success in our system. How do we identify that success? How do we privilege it? How do we build a coalition of success amongst those teachers who are doing this? It is the case that we often get asked, can you bring visible learning into the school? And our first answer is, what is the problem it's solving? Because if you are getting systematically greater than that 0.4 effect, then all we do is reinforce what you do. But if you don't, we then have to come in and say, well, let's do a needs analysis to work out what's going to change in the school. And that's tough because a lot of teachers don't like to give up what they've been doing for 10 or 20 years. But certainly it is the case that when we show schools and we show teachers what their impact is, they listen. But unfortunately, we have a culture where we deny that information. And we say, are you involved in interesting, engaging, and authentic activities? Are the children enjoying themselves? Are they satisfied? Absolutely uninteresting questions. Because students will stay in this business called schooling if they're challenged, if they start to get some ownership of their learning, if they are working with people where they have a sense of trust when they don't know, they can say, I don't know, help. And we as a profession are pretty good at that. So that is my message, is how we can better understand what that success is out there, how we can understand and teach our teachers to know their impact, how we can get our school leaders to start to work and to work with our teachers. So they talk about instruction, they talk about the impact of instruction. They don't worry about every teacher understanding the mission of the school and making sure they have all the autonomy they want in the world to do their job. Because some teachers have no right to autonomy. Some teachers have enormous right to autonomy. And certainly in my country at the moment where we're talking about autonomy for principals, I cannot get excited. I want to know about autonomy for teachers. And I'd like to see if we could have a ladder of progression in teaching where teachers can go out and they can take time, as doctors do. As, for instance, I started my career as an apprentice paper and paper hanger. Within 6 months, I did not expect to be a brilliant paper and paper hanger. Yeah, that was 30-odd years ago. Now, it'd probably take you 10 minutes to do paper and paper hanging. But for my first 6 months, all I was learned to do was how to paste. Unfortunately, in teachers, they all expect to be outstanding within 6 months. And I think this is what's killing our profession. There is expertise. There is a practice of teaching. We're very good at it. But we don't all get there immediately. How do we get ladders in our profession of expertise so that we can convince our community, our parents, and our politicians that the